All right, so knowing yourself has already got an account, I'm just going to surf through this with the assumption that the person that's watching this tutorial has already got their login, and this is them you've just logged in, and so you're going to see a whole lot of this stuff, which is, you know, has its pros and cons, but personally it's quite overwhelming. So from my point of view, how you manage your own stuff, obviously completely up to you. The way I've tried to set it up for Newport and for NBC is to really try and have a base project folder. So if you navigate over to the left here and hit projects, you'll end up with a projects view, which, yes, it summarizes some thumbnails there for your recent items, but it also lists all your folders themselves, which you can subset. So here we've got NBC. That seems pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead into there. And you can also create subfolders. So the idea being, obviously, that as you grow with more and more templates, that becomes pretty important, because you end up with so many files and so many thumbnails to look at that you're like, oh God, what am I looking at? And of course, season on season, it gets exponentially worse. So we try and keep them into the obvious, I guess, folders that you can. There's no particular rules per se, other than just try and keep it simple. For imagine someone's filling in for you. If it's a new person coming on board, for example, as a classic example, you need to share something quickly and just get it finished off for whatever reason. You want them to be able to know that they just need to jump into announcements. And edit for example, the single page story, which might be this particular file. We'll come back to files in a second and create a file, for example. But this just gives you an idea of how you'd sort of jump in and get into that folder. Year on year, if I go back up here, you've got your breadcrumbs. So this stuff up here is pretty important in terms of just, if you need to use your back button, that's fine up in your browser, depending on what browser you use. But also you've got this little paper trail here. The breadcrumbs literally, you know, tell you where you've come from and how far back you can go. So they're little hot links that you can jump back to as well. I'm just going to have a quick look at events and fundraising, for example. It's probably a good opportunity for us to have a look at stuff that's from last year. So this is an example where we might want to create a folder and actually set up. So the way I kind of typically do it for my business side of things, and doesn't have to be done this way here, but sort of chronologically, you just want to bundle everything that's out of date. So there's a little bit of a logic there that goes with it. If I hit the plus up in the top right-hand corner here, you've got a few options that you can add. So the first one is folder. That's what we're going to do here. We can cover some of the other items there after, because they're all super handy, but they're all very different things. But for now, the example is we want to go ahead and create a folder. This can be anywhere in the process, but this example is probably the most common one we're going to come across, where you've got a folder inside of another folder, because you're like, oh, I'm just looking at too much garbage. I need to subset it. So we're going to call this season 21-22 and create folder. It's that simple, and it should appear up here in the folders section. And anything in here that we want to select, you can actually just hover top left, and you can go ahead and select those items. So this is all obviously last season. This one's generic, so I'm going to uncheck that. Sounds good, right? You can click and drag these items. So, if it lets me, come on. Oh, it's not doing it. They might have changed. So one of the things about Canva is it does have a desktop version, but what we're looking at is a browser version. It may not behave the same. So I'm going to just go ahead and right-click on that instead. No, that's not working either. They might have changed their interface, so just bear with me a sec. Here we go. Down the bottom. Down the bottom, they've got a little trash can and a little folder. So there used to be other options where you could right-click and move to folder, etc. They've just done it down the bottom. So there's a little toolbar down here. And if we tap on move to folder, it gives us pretty much what we need to see. You could search if you know exactly what you're looking for, but let's just go through the process from scratch. So we're going to My Projects. We're going to go to NBC. We were inside of Events and Fundraising.
Yep.
And now we've got our subfolder there. So we're just going to hit Move to Folder. They're all going to disappear and go into that folder. And now year on year, you can kind of keep track of things. So this is probably the classic example of where you come into next season and you're like, oh, I've got to whip these up. You know, typically, you know, it's not so much that you leave it to last minute, is that it's just we're all busy. You know, things get in the way of all the best laid plans. So yeah, typically, you know, Heritage Sponsors Day is probably one that's coming up. That's another good example. So what we do in that scenario is we'd come into here, we'd open that file up. There's a couple of ways you can make a copy, but this is probably one of the more common ways to do it. You open up the file, and the first thing you're going to do is make a copy of it. So top left-hand side, File, Make a Copy is down the bottom.
Yep.
Going to go ahead and do that. And it's likely to plonk it in the same folder. We're going to check that in a second once we've renamed the file. We're going to go back to that interface and see where it actually went, because one of the things that I found probably could be improved with Canva is, like I said, there's a lot of clutter there. So sort of trying to probably have their cake and eat it too a little bit with what they show you. But yeah, as I showed before, you go to instinctively drag and drop something and it apparently is not working anymore. Doesn't mean it'll never work, or maybe it's a Mac thing, who knows. But let's go ahead and rename that file to 2023. And we don't need to do anything else just yet. Because really, more than anything, this is an example of where you're quickly creating this file. You might literally all you need to do is change the dates and get out of there. That's great, because a lot of this stuff is branded, templated stuff. So that's the idea. Anything that's custom, or you want to update photos and stuff, that's probably the example we're going to go through shortly in terms of creating a new version. Anyway, for now, once we've finished doing that, up the top left, you've got a home button. So let's just hit that. And we'll go through saving in a second, but just rest assured on the cloud version, especially, I'm pretty sure on the desktop version, it's the same. It will be auto saving every few seconds. So when you hit back and stuff, if for some reason it hasn't synced yet and it hasn't saved, it will warn you. So yeah, so just don't panic too much. All right, so it's come up in our designs here.
Yep.
Just for what it's worth, let's go and see if it actually is in the folder that we copied it from.
I reckon whenever I do it on the app, particularly like I use the phone and the iPad app, for some reason it saves it to my folder, if you like, and then I have to move it to the right folder.
Yeah, that's what it's done here. So that's a good one. And again, you know, they could update the app in a month, and this will be updated already. That's all good, but the principle is the same. That's what you're looking for. The primary thing is you're trying to move it somewhere and locate that particular thing. So let's go ahead and move that one. This time, we're not going to put it in the 2021 folder. We can just put it straight in to that events folder, because that's at the top. So the current season stuff, all the current items should be sitting visible and ready to go. That's just the way I suppose I'd be looking for it. And where do we go? Here we go. Beautiful. So there it is. So it's sitting there ready to roll. Maybe coming back to the naming conventions, here's a good example. Misspelled announcements. So in order to rename a folder, you just right click on the little three dots that you get. There's a bunch of options there, but again, you can go ahead and fix pretty much everything there. So in terms of the groupings, you can see there's junior program, senior program, women's program. That may change over time. These are just the sort of more logical breakup that we've come to, I guess, in 2022, 23. But there's not really any limit to it. I mean, we can subset it as much as we want, and that's probably just something for everyone to consider as going forward, as to having more people involved and potentially able to make these templates just if we're going to create extra depth, then we probably want to make that decision as a group. So perhaps every season that we're running, there'll be maybe that thought process at the start of the season, just to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of where stuff goes. Because as you mentioned, sometimes you'll make a copy and it might copy it to your local sort of area of projects, and it may not actually go into NBC. So they're the sort of obvious ones that could get missed, where you think you've done the work and then you go to share it with someone, it's not really accessible in the NBC team anymore. So you'd have to give them a personal invite, and potentially that's a whole other kettle of fish. All right, so maybe for the moment that's probably covered one of the key things we want to be able to do is create folders and organize things. The next one is probably creating a brand new file. There's a couple of different ways to do it. So I'm going to go back to my projects because I've actually got an example already in here, a couple of examples of two different ways we created this file. So I'm just going to pop that over here. So that's the end result file. So this was a single page, what's on this week's story. The ratios and whatnot, I'll get into in a second because I'll show you how I came to this particular shape and size, because you think, well, how do I know what size stuff is for Facebook and Instagram and, et cetera, et cetera. Thankfully, that's been sorted. So there's less to worry about these days with that, when previously you had to know the exact size to make it right. So things are fairly straightforward now, but we'll come to how to set up a file from scratch in a second. So sort of wanted to get to the end of this file to show you how it got created and where it actually came from. So this file was sent over. You're going to potentially have a variety of people with a variety of software creating different documents. So a lot of people have Microsoft Office, Office 365, etc., Google, Docs, you name it. Publisher, PowerPoint, even some people use the Apple suite of Keynote and other things. So there's lots and lots of different ways to do the actual hard work of the layout and creating a nice poster or whatever it is, a brochure. But to get it in here, it's not that flexible. Like it can import PDFs, and that I have sort of had a fairly decent success with that. But invariably, what you're saving yourself time with, and I'll come back to this file now, and we'll have a look at what happens when you actually import the PDF. See if I can grab it from the desktop. Just bear with me. Where is our lovely PDF? This week's games. All right, cool. So there's our PDF on the desktop there. Let's go ahead and create a design. So at the top right.
Yep.
Now, does it give us import file? Sorry, there is two ways to do this. So there is another area where you can do a drop down. I'm just going to do it from here because this is probably the most obvious button you're going to see is create a design up here. So let's do it up here. On the right-hand bottom, you've got import file. Let's go ahead and tap that. It's going to ask you for said file. Go ahead and grab it off your desktop and drag it in, or if you know where to navigate to, select it. That's a PDF of what was, I think, originally created in Microsoft Publisher or something like that. So again, probably just a safe bet to export as a PDF in as high quality as you can, because what we're trying to do here is save you the hard work of retyping it all out for obvious reasons, potential typos and a whole bunch of things. So it's just going to save you time. So go ahead and do that. Oh, hello, someone shared a design with me. That's lovely. Now, has it actually created it? There it is. All right, so it's in our recent designs. So let's go ahead and tap on that to open it up. So what it's going to have done is, you'll better see the file size up here. If you hit file, it's going to give you a series of options, but also it's going to tell you the basic size. So this is an A4 document, 21 by 29.7 centimeters. If you've got a pro version of Canva, you can actually resize and it will auto resize for you. That's not super important here because The purpose of this is to kind of show you two different ways to do it. One being this is good enough, and you just kind of quickly fix the fonts up or whatever and get out of there, and we'll do that first. But in this case, say it was an A4, you're off and running because you've already kind of preset those sizes. In our case, we wanted to get this into story size. So that's where I'll take you through that finished result first. So for argument's sake, let's say we're doing the quick and nasty. I just need this to be a flyer so I can send it to the printer or print it out, 10 copies to take down the club. First thing you're going to notice is the difference between the PDF preview and this. There may be key differences, there may not. But likely what will happen is the fonts might go a bit funny because it's saying here, actually, it does understand IBM, Plex, Sans, or whatever, but that's probably not actually the font that it was in Microsoft. It's just converted to that. So it can be a little messy, and I don't expect people to necessarily be font nerds like me. But one of the tips I can provide is just go back to the templates that are there, and you'll see there's a suite of fonts that we typically use. And say every couple of years, you might just do a new set of templates, but you try to keep it going for a couple of years just to save everyone grief. And it also gets that familiarity and awareness really strong across the not just the club's branding and marketing. It just makes it easier for everyone knowing what to select. So in my case, I already know it's going to be Roboto. Now, fancier fonts tend to be Norwester, or in some cases we'll use Oswald if we need it super compressed. It depends on the day. But again, those older templates you'll be able to recognize those fonts pretty well. One of the key things you'll see here is we've also got 3 separate text boxes for these 3 things. You may, for example, want to create everything in one text box. That's fine. But what you're going to probably have difficulty with is it can be tricky to manage different colors and different fonts inside that one hero box. So in this case, it's letting me change the color, but I don't know if it's going to actually let us change the font. It does sometimes. It can be a little buggy. So I would recommend probably keep your headings and key text separate. There you go. Copy paste didn't work. So it can be a little flaky. And I think some of that is just legacy of the fact that it's brought in and converted a file. So it's not native, and it's sort of doing its best. But this saves you a lot of grief because, especially, I think last year, Dale, when we worked with the some of those proposal docs for sponsorship, maybe 20 pages of work done, would have been 20 more pages of work to do to build it in here. So one of the big benefits of it being able to be imported was simply that it worked, that I got maybe 9 out of 10 quality, and I was able to just spend that last hour on it and tidy it up to get it looking like the way it should. And then now we do have a permanent template to use so that we can just do a save as each year. So that's kind of the short and nasty of that. I'm just going to bring this back to where it was. You've got a couple of things to consider with layout, particularly with text. One thing Canva doesn't have, this line spacing, while visually pretty obvious as to what it's actually doing. One thing that's not particularly great, and I'm sure they'll upgrade it at some point, is that the difference between a paragraph space and a line space, that line spacing usually is about 120%, say 1.2 is pretty typical. But when you want a paragraph, just a little bit extra space, you don't necessarily want a full return, and particularly in a doc like this, you end up with way too much space. You're going to run out of room, and that's why we'll get to the other solution where we did it a slightly different way, which does involve potentially more effort. But once we've built the template, it's shareable and usable each week. So the effort to build the first template, honestly, is usually 90% of the whole year's work. Is getting that first one done. But the joys of being able to share it around with the crew is amazing, and has obvious huge benefits because you don't need to be a graphic designer to be able to use this software. It's really straightforward. So that I suppose part of the key part of this tutorial is to familiarize ourselves with the software, but also just give you a bit of confidence. It's really not that difficult. And And the end aim being that even for people that are still a little bit worried, oh, I'm going to break something, there's likely with the templates sort of setup, there's likely less to do. So you really are just going and changing dates, or this team, for example, if we added a new team in, so we've got our fifths in or what have you. So we've got to put these extra details in for the next week. So again, you just do a save as and whatnot. So that's just a super quick rundown of this really quick and nasty version. Again, I just showed you we've brought it in so you can see some legacy stuff, like it's got these little white lines which are in the PDF. You can see them there, but they would have been underlines on the font, not in.
Yep.
So it's doing its best, but it's not. Its by no means perfect, but you can Control U and still apply those things if you want manually. And so all the same shortcuts should work for your text. So bolding and italicizing, underlining should all be the same. But we'll turf this one anyway, because this one was just an example.
Yep.
It will have saved it, so I'll just go ahead and show you how to actually delete stuff, which is probably going to give people a lot of anxiety, because they're going to go, oh, but I don't want to delete it. That's fine. Someone can be the garbage man at the end of the season. That's fine. As you can see here, because this is my account, it has a lot of different stuff just listed. We've got some of the baseball stuff and also some other work that's been done over time. But generally, when you're doing quick updates stuff, that's really all you care about is what's recent, because you usually have worked on something. Otherwise, yes, we're going straight into the folder setups. So that's where we'll go. So I'll just delete these little guys. Oh, actually, undo. That's a good example. So I just changed my mind. So let's maybe just it's letting me drag it now. Look at that. So I'll go back in and let's just open up two tabs for the argument's sake. Are you able to see the second tab that I just dragged out?
Yes, I think I can. So I can see on the one screen you've got home Canva twice. So
if I'm moving this around, can you see that?
Oh no, I can't see that.
Okay. That is fine. I will do a full desktop share just so we can get the gist of tab management. So there's our library. It's another way of doing it too, is if you're copying and pasting between two docs, leave your folder set up or your thumbnails, whatever you prefer, and just have another tab open across here. So I've just got that PDF that we converted again over here.
Yep.
And you can kind of see a bit of a starting point with this particular doc. So how did I get it to here? Well, first of all, I created a new file. So I'll go back and start this. We'll start this guy from scratch. And I do have a backup. I do have a second Zoom if we run out of time as well.
Yep.
Okay, so create a design. So when you hover over the items, it gives you a pixel size, or a size, I should say. It doesn't have to be pixels. Instagram story is portrait. So that 1080 by 1920 is the opposite of your telly. It's just straight up and down. For the nerds out there, yes, that's recognizable, because HD was that size, and 4K is double that. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because they've now started to make all these the same ratios. So that makes a huge difference in terms of not having to do 5 versions of the same file. What you'll likely notice, will generally have templates in square format by default, purely because it works everywhere. And even if you want to post on LinkedIn, post on LinkedIn. No one really cares. The stories tend to be temporary, 24-hour type things. They tend to be vertical format. That's why it's that way. Same with Facebook and any other social that comes in out of this year. So why does that matter? Well, you just don't want to have to resize the templates and do all that work again, particularly when I show you the multi-page templates, because that's when you do have a bit more work to do. It's not impossible by any means, but there's reasons why you would do a single page versus a multi-page, and we'll get to that in a second. But starting with your desired size is pretty important. So in this case, We know we're going to do a story size, a portrait, so we're going to hit that option. Again, you can duplicate other templates, and likely we'll be doing that as you get more familiar with it, but you can always just go to the create and check the sizing. As I said, if you've got a pro plan, you do up the top left-hand side here have a resize option, and it gives you a whole bunch of presets. You have the option to resize the document as is, and it will leave everything on the canvas untouched while it resizes the canvas. Or in the case where I want to resize this A4 document to a story, which we'll just pick one here, or even just a square, we'll just pick copy and resize. It's going to copy that document and it's going to resize. Cool. So we've got a 10-minute warning. That should be enough. And you can see here that it's actually changed. It's changed the size of the canvas and pretty much untouched everything else. But it's now a file size of 1080 by 1080 px. Don't worry about the differences between millimeters and pixels. That doesn't matter. The ratios are all that matter. You know it's a square because it's the same number top and bottom. So we're good here. That just kind of gives you a really quick overview of resizing, but also it gives you an idea of the reason I bother doing that when I know I'm going to get it into a story is really just to quickly get this resized so that I can copy paste into my new document, because I know it's going to fit. So this document is 1080 wide by 1920 high. So if I paste that in, it's definitely going to fit, and I can scale and do other things to make it fit. So that's sort of the first one was, okay, import, it's converted to PDF. You just want to make a couple of cleanups and you might just send it out. This one's slightly different, and we're copying and pasting into a particular size template. And again, you might need to make some changes. Maybe you want to change the background color, whatever you need to do. So these are your sort of typical quick fire examples when you've only got sort of 10 minutes or whatnot. Yeah, usually sort of 15 to 30 minutes, and you'll have finished a template depending on whether you've got an existing one or not. If you're doing it from scratch and you've already done all the work, then again, it might actually only be 5 minutes worth to come in here and just play around with it. So there's going to be all different skill levels. The tutorial is entirely supposed to be about the full spectrum. So it may be a steep learning curve at first for some, and that's completely fine. There's no perfect expectation here. And one of the benefits of those templates, again, is the fact that if in doubt, just copy a template, and you should be able to just edit the text. So let's maybe move over to one of those where we've taken this guy to the next level, and let's have a look at that, because that was the one we were looking at the start. So you'll remember this one because we had a quick look at it before. Got a few minutes left before we jump out, and you would have seen as it was loading there, the fonts weren't quite right and a couple of things happened. Again, that's just the browser doing its thing. So you can see that all the same information's there, but we've got a little bit of a different sort of, I guess, appeal here. First and foremost, we've also got a bit of animation there. So one of the massive game changers with this software is that it combines the layout software with animation. Yes, PowerPoint's been able to do it. There's lots of things that can do it, but this allows you to export directly to digital formats so quickly and so easily. It's just, I cannot describe to you, after learning this stuff 20 years ago, the amount of time it saves you to get a quality output is incredible. So this one-page example, for example, I can control the timing. So I can say, I want this to be on for 7 seconds. Why does that matter for a single page? Well, we've got a little animation. So if it didn't have an animation, you would just export it as a JPEG or a PNG. I won't go into those file formats tonight, but JPEG is probably the optimum version generally because it'll be a smaller file size. In this case, because we've got animation, that's not going to work. We actually need to download as an MP4 or a GIF. Now, we're all familiar with GIFs. They're in every meme you've ever seen. The difference between a GIF and a video is a GIF will not have any sound, and a GIF is generally designed to be quite small in file size. MP4 for social is generally better suited because it's going to retain a lot of that quality and it's going to retain the sound as well. So we're going to download that, hit download. It will give you a couple of options like save download settings. That's all fine. Do whatever you like. hit download, and then down here, this is where it gets a little confusing. It's probably a good spot to potentially finish on. It's doing its little downloading thing here, depending on how many pages your thing has. It could be a couple of megabytes. So just understand that if you email it to people, that's more of a concern. Whereas on social, it'll do what it's designed to do, which is compress it however they need it to be, and they'll deal with the hosting and all those kinds of things. So we pretty much got to the best bit. So recording in the background is saving at the moment. It's probably another thing worth mentioning. If you're ever recording in Zoom, just be prepared for it doing this, because it will potentially, it depends on what computer you're using, but sometimes it actually chews up a lot of RAM and you might not be able to actually open another meeting. So just be aware of that. But for the purposes of this, we finished off the first session. I'll splice these together, but basically where we got to is saving our first video file, because this single page solution actually has animation. I'll just quickly, again, just cover the idea that if you don't really need the animation, that animation will just flatten out. So we can actually still save it as a JPEG. So that's absolutely fine. Let's just go ahead and do that, just because that's a really quick thing. And I can just show you the two results. Again, it's going to save and then prompt you to save it somewhere. So I always just plonk everything on the desktop and kind of deal with it from there. So we've got our two stories here. Whoa, didn't like that. Oh, it's because I've exposed the desktop. There we go. So there's our flattened version. You can see the arrow is still there. It's all good. The text is pretty sharp. If you save as a PNG, it will be a bigger file, but it will be sharper. There's a lot of reasoning behind that, but a lot of the time you're just going to need a JPEG. It's going to be fine. It's going to do the job. Yeah, I just grabbed the other story. There we go. So there's our single story. So you would have noticed a couple of things that happened there. So let's just launch that again. As you can see, it's got an entrance animation. So it's not just running that arrow constantly. So where did that come from? So I didn't quite cover that before. So that's probably a good opportunity to just quickly go back there. The pages themselves have the ability to have animations done across all items. So there's a lot of presets here. The Pro plans have, and the Pro plans have a little crown, like a king's crown next to them. You're not really missing out on a huge amount by not having those, but ultimately they're pretty extensive. These are sort of stock standard items are pretty good, but you'll see in here we've got a couple options here. If I hover over corporate, for example, it should kind of give me a preview of what it's going to do. Now it's chucked a spaz here because it's actually doing that RAM thing I was just telling you about. So it's probably not going to work super smooth. Let's try Disco. It'll probably flash a bit. Yeah, it's still a bit rough, so it's not going to show you a great preview. But I guess my point being is that when we get to the multi-page one now, you get to see some of this stuff. So even though we had a single page one, it's not just restricted to, as I said, that little arrow going on for 7 seconds. It also has a little wow factor just to grab your attention. Why does that matter? Well, you don't have to do it, but it's such a low-hanging fruit. It's so easy to get to that you may as well, because you're competing against every single other thing in everyone's social feed. So that's why this software solution is so handy for amateurs and above. It just makes a huge game changer.
Yep.
All right, so getting out of here, let's have a look at the multi-page solution of the same item. And we can very briefly cover why would you do it? Why would you make a multi-page option? Seems like a bit of overkill. But these examples that came up recently are actually the perfect example of where these templates come in really handy, because we didn't have this template in previous seasons. So the idea came up, oh, why not do it? And there was absolutely nothing wrong with the ones that have been designed and posted before, but they weren't in Canva, and everyone has potentially free access to Canva, whereas the other software, for example, things like Publisher, for example, I don't have access to. Depending on some people's, they might prefer Adobe and whatever. So there's a lot of reasons, barriers to entry there as to why that can be just a bit of a hassle.
Yep.
So down the bottom, you'll notice there's thumbnails for the pages. So that's kind of really important for what we're about to go through. So it gives you a really quick storyboard of what's going on there. And I'm pretty sure you can enlarge the thumbnails here. No, somewhere over here. I thought you could. Maybe that's changed. Yeah, you can kind of do it. You can kind of do it two ways. You can close the thumbnail view and just scroll through them like this. Some people prefer that. Knock yourself out. That's not a huge thing. Why it's handy to have these thumbnails here though is because what we're going to look at now is two types of animation that come in really handy. So imagine what we call traditionally a storyboard is we have key frames. So each page is a different part of the story. So we start with a cover, then page 2. In this case, we did the reasoning behind having a multi-page version of that same single page solution, which was this guy, is because some people won't be able to read that. So that could be an inclusivity thing or accessibility issue. So It's nice to have a couple of options. Again, we're a not-for-profit club, volunteer run, so we're not expecting us to be able to completely cover everything, but where we can, we always willing to try. So that's probably worth noting for anyone that's watching. If they've come across something like that before, that's a great example of where that feedback's really important, so that we can potentially improve anything. But for argument's sake, at the moment, this particular item, I felt, okay, we're likely going to need a version of this that has more than one page, and that allows us to have much bigger text. Potentially, even if I was to very quickly, roughly resize this to a 1080 by 1080, let's see what it does. It might actually destroy it. Oh, it did a pretty good job. So what will happen is it will try and do its best to work out what you would have done. In this case, the bottom, you can see the bottom footers are all kind of funny now, and the top header, weirdly, it did the cover right, but not the rest. So questions, reasons, I don't know. But there's a couple of little bits of tricks here that I've done to create this kind of background, so that baseball image has a bit more black tint to it. They're two separate objects. So what it's done there is it's actually ignored that top object. So you can see it's not perfect by any means, this software, but what I was just able to do is just very quickly crop that to basically take the top and the bottom off, because the width didn't change, and yet it's smart enough to go, I'm just going to chuck it all in the middle. So depending on what type of level of design you've got, it actually does give you potentially a solution without having to do any more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. It does have undo and redo a bunch of things. You won't be able to undo forever, but it's pretty handy. And as I said up here, that little cloud tick just indicates that it is up to date. If you see it thinking, then obviously it's saving as well. All right, so I'll try and speed through this example so you can see what the methodology behind it was. Okay, let's give them a cover. And then down the bottom footer, we've got a header first of all, clearly stating what year it is, what season it's for, and that harks back to us organizing seasonal folders. Is that over time we may as a club use this for a couple of years. Great, no problems. I mean, why reinvent the wheel? There may be reasons why we change it, but for the moment, season by season, it's pretty logical just to keep them together. So the other advantage here is that we do have a little bit of a time marker there. So on social, you'll see back through time, you'll be able to see these things change, and also it makes it really easy to edit for next season. Now on the footer here, we've got every Wednesday for T-ball, because that's a weekly event, and then we follow that format throughout. So we've got Friday plus a date. Well, I'll get into what just happened there in a second. So we've got Friday, we've got a Saturday event, we've got Sunday, and then Sunday will repeat. Sunday will repeat until it's finished. So we get up to page 7, and depending on how many games you need to cover, you may end up needing to create a new one. So what I'd just done before and ended up deleting was Yes, buddy.
Like a pen, please.
You'd like a pen. Come and say hello, Hunter. You're going to be saved into more immortality on this Zoom Canva Zoom call. Here's a pen, bud. Here you go. Red one or blue one? Just hunt around, buddy, and I'll keep going with Dale. You got one? I swear it's all one. Dale, have you got a pen?
Yeah, I've got one here.
Just poke it through the camera. I just bloody had it because I did a thing yesterday. I swear I had it. This is fun for the viewers.
Oh no, my dad.
Cool story. All right, thanks, buddy.
How good your video editing? Yeah.
Unreal. Okay, so we can undo this anyway, but this is obviously the second you do these week to week, they become out of date. But again, it's a timestamp on the year. So while it probably seems a little anal, you do really want to do a copy each week because there might be reasons to change stuff or what have you. And also it's nice to be able to kind of easily go back without having to surf through social. Oh, what did we do that week when we changed the thing or whatever it was? So in this case, for example, seniors was fairly easy to do on one page because the 4s and 5s had a buy. But if they were at different grounds, for example, you can see it just wouldn't have fit. So we potentially would have ended up doing smaller text and moving the heading around like with juniors here. So you can see a little bit of movement there between the women's page and the juniors one because of that amount of text. So it's a little bit of common sense there. Again, this was that example I was saying before about line spacing. So it's nice and even, but actually these lines belong together. So you kind of want them to be together. And it's a lot of effort to go in and change the line size just for one item. And you can do it, as you can see, but it's a bit of a pain.
Yeah, okay.
So,
yeah, got it.
So largely, I wouldn't expect anyone to do that. I can't be bothered, that's for sure. So it just comes down to what particular thing you're working on. So like with the sponsorship templates, we put a lot of effort into those because they are not just important documents, but also they're very unlikely to change year to year. These ones, because they're weekly, it's like, yeah, let's just get it done. So for example, fast forward to next week, you come along and go, right, oh, damn it, I need a new one. You literally just copy paste that page, just select the thumbnail. I'll just do that again, so it's real quick. Down the bottom here, select the thumbnail, copy paste, and it will duplicate everything about that page. So we talked about animations before. As you can see, we've got an animated arrow still. That's an element that you can bring in. We'll cover all that stuff later. Honestly, there's so much stuff you can play with in the elements area here. You can upload your own stuff, but yeah, arrow, for example, it's going to preload a lot of stuff for you just automatically. And as you can see, some of these items are animated. So I didn't make this. I can make this kind of stuff. I can make it, but it's a lot of effort, right? So anything you can grab and dump in, do it. You know, here's another arrow. So just drag and drop, and there you go. You've got another one. So there's lots of things you can take advantage of there. The general fonts and the colors and all that, generally they stay the same. Yeah, this blue's not our blue. That's okay. We do different accent colors from time to time, and that's where that's probably the key word there, is that it's a time to time thing, whereas the other branding tends to be locked in our navy or our red. So getting back to the seniors example, so say the 4s and the 5s are playing at Cheltenham. Ooh, maybe they're both playing at Cheltenham, and we want to just say starting at, there's our Canva, save that somewhere. So they're going to be playing at Cheltenham, and then of course our second page is duplicated, so now we don't need our 4s and 5s in there because we've already covered that. And then these guys, for example, maybe at home. However we want to write that, at home or in BC. I can't remember what we did in the other pages. What we did. Excellent. It's super sensitive. I'll show you why in a second, because there's a reason.
At home.
Oh yeah, we wrote at home anyway. So the logic's still the same. So I've gone ahead and messed up this particular template, so I'm just going to undo until it goes back to that single page. Beautiful. All right, so this template is ready to roll. Now, given that it's for this weekend, and we've already, I believe, posted it, it's not a huge drama, but again, as I said, if we're going to do next week's, we'd make a copy. But right now, I'm not really going to make any changes. I'm just going to finish off this tube by just kind of pulling apart how there are different approaches for how you can animate. The pages themselves, as I said, these items all have, each individual item has the ability to be animated. So this one's a good example. If I click on the play button up here, you're going to see 36 seconds. So this whole thing runs for half a minute. Why is that important? Not hugely important, but once you go past 59 seconds on Instagram, I believe it turns into
it's going to trim it.
That's like maybe a year old in 2022. So whatever. I'm not keeping up with all that stuff, but it's going to be something like that. And so they set those parameters, they change all the time, and they bring out new stuff. So, you know, future Dave will have to deal with that. So at the moment anyway, we've got a bit of a timestamp. When you get more familiar with it, you get a good feel for, oh, wow, that shouldn't be that long. So each one of these pages has a time associated with it. So if I click on the thumbnail, up the top left, it has that little timer. So you get a very quick look at what that page is running at. So if I wanted the cover to go on for 10 seconds, you can do that. All it's going to do is it's just going to put little timestamps inside of the output MP4, but it's actually technically 24 frames per second paused for those seconds that you put it on. It's
yep.
You know, if it was HTML video, it'd be different, and there'd be time markers, and it would actually be vector, and there'd be a whole bunch of things that would make the file size tiny. But that's HTML web. We can't possibly do that. It'd be awesome if they could. I don't know if they ever will. I don't know if they could, to be honest, but there is some pretty nifty software out there. But again, low-hanging fruit. This means that we can actually do it pretty easily together and as a group. So while I've set all these transitions myself, it's probably worth just noting that, again, I've just tried to pick what I believe sort of suits in terms of from a designer's point of view. You kind of have a flavor for what the kids stuff is like, and then what's the more fun things versus the more corporate, or say it's a bereavement or whatever. So you have a bit of a tone for animation styles as well, and that's probably pretty important. As I said, there is a default. So if you select the pages themselves, aside from the timestamp that it's got there, if you click on the page thumbnail and then just click on animate, again, it has presets up here. So there it's actually running a couple of previews. If you just hover over it, you can see there's some pretty obvious type of differences between each one. Some are more comical or what have you. The reason why you do this generally as someone that's time poor or just can't be bothered, first of all, just leave it as it is, because they will be inbuilt anyway. Mm-hmm. But so when you make a copy, it'll keep those settings. But if you did want to go a bit more bananas, do this first, because you get a quick look at it. So another good one is, let's say, white. It kind of slices everything in. Rise is another one that kind of works quite well no matter what content you've got. Fade is pretty typical PowerPoint-y type of thing. Depends on the shapes you've got. Again, if you just hover over it, you get a feel for any of those little dicky bits that you're like, oh, it doesn't look very good. That just saves you having to commit to it. So if you want to leave it,
sure,
just you don't have to touch it. Likewise, if you have done this to each page, you're selecting all the pages and you hit animate, it will apply those changes to all pages. So that's also really important in terms of saving yourself the grief of having to remember what you put on the last page if you subtly change little things. If you start with one page and copy each page, then you've achieved that. But if you change your mind, you have to do it 7 times, or you can select all the thumbnails and then make the change once. So that's sort of a super handy time saver there. So say you've done all that, there's a couple of things that you'll check. So I'd recommend you hit the play button up the top right-hand corner. We're going to do that now, and it's literally going to play it. It's just going to play it as is, and you're going to get to see the whole thing work. There's a few things going on here that I've made subtle edits to. Depending on how the document gets built over time as copies of these are made. For example, if those text boxes aren't edited but deleted and then a new text box is added in, generally those won't retain those animation settings. I don't believe you'd have to reapply them unless it's a page animation. The page animation just tells everything what to do, whereas you can also have combinations. So I've done combinations here just because I'm a massive nerd and I love doing this. The two sides of this, and you'll do a lot of previews when you do your first couple of templates, is you really just want to see the thing work. So you've seen the preview, you've then come in here, you've seen the whole thing work and how they transition. That's the next thing. And this is where those stupid little funny bits came up before when I accidentally was creating new pages. If I hover around here, it's giving me a shortcut of add page. And of course, the default is to add the same background as the previous page, which is why I kept stupidly pressing on it, but it is a little bit sensitive there. So what I'm trying to show you is actually not that. Just be aware that it does get in the way a little bit when you're trying to look at this. You can click on one page at a time and do this, or you can click on all 7 again. Typically, I would recommend keeping consistent. So just like with your branding, you would be consistent across the board. Your animation styles generally will be consistent. And the last type of animation style is a transition. So in PowerPoint, typically you'll have an automatic fade or dissolve between the two slides. You can have a swipe up. There's a million different ones. So if I right click on here, you do actually now have in Canva a change transition. And look at that. It's got all these cool things for us to play with. So we've actually got the ability to see what happens between each of these different things. So slide one's a good one for a lot of use cases. Dissolve typically works pretty well as a slideshow photography type thing. But in our case, it's not necessarily needed. But they've just released this beta, which is awesome. And it's in a lot of the other software I use, and it's called Match and Move. It's basically a smart animate. And so where does that come in? Well, page 1 to page 2, you'll notice the footer is a lot fatter on page 1, but it just drops down. So what it's actually doing, if we play this again, watch what happens when it transitions to page 2. I don't know if it went too quick there, but it's not just going page 2 and just flashing a different screen. It's actually grabbing that footer and it's pulling it down. So it's adding those extra little steps in between. I didn't have to set it to do that. I just told the page transition to work. I selected that item and it knew what to do. So again, I would select all those pages. I'd go change transition. I'm just going to do stack for the moment and then change it and then lock that in. So what we should see, page transition there, it should show, depending on how this stream's working, you should see it smoothly move down. So again, that's all a lot of effort this feels like to go to, but as you can see, they're quite quick settings to do. And if you are wanting a more finessed result, it's just a little bit more time each time you do it. So depending on what you're doing, if you're setting up a long-term template like this one, then yeah, it's probably worth the effort. But if it's like, you're helping a friend out or whatever, like, yeah, just do something quickly. Don't stress too much. I won't touch print stuff tonight. You can export with print and bleed and stuff in this now, which is, again, really, really handy, for especially those that can't afford Adobe, because it's not cheap. So this is a much more affordable thing at free, but even the pro plan is like $16 or something a month at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to do what's right. So there was one more thing I suppose I wanted to just cover, and that was how I have applied individual animations. So with this page, how do I do this? Does it have, I don't think I've got any defaults on this one. So let me just select this page again. I believe I put, okay, good. So when you have the animation panel open, I'll do that again just from scratch. So if I went too quick. So you hit animate and then the panel opens. That's really important. Now you can select your objects and it will scroll and then highlight what I've actually selected there. So I'm pointing with my human hand and I should be using my mouse hand. This guy here for Stomp, whatever effect you're looking for, again, hover on the other ones, test them out, see what works for you. There's a couple of cool different ones. In this case, this shape is actually a text box and a color box grouped together. And then it's working out some way to do it. The reason I'm sort of maybe bothering to spend a little bit of time on this guy is you can see all the really quick differences that you can achieve just by hovering over. Once you've found the perfect solution that you want, you hit go. You'll notice down the bottom here, there's a both on enter and on exit. That's really, really, really cool. So that was part, I don't even know if that's a year old yet, but there was a point in every animator's, timeline management is really important. And when you're controlling for when something comes on screen, how long it holds, you tell your story and then exiting, all that stuff's fundamentally basic in terms of animation school. But for some reason, a lot of these free tools, they just go, right, play, go, and it's really rough and not manageable. For them to have added this really takes it away from me needing to use After Effects or something more fancy pants for ultimately what is just not reasonable for a club to be running. You don't expect people to have to subscribe or anything. So this is a really, really cool feature. So what does this actually mean? So animate on both, it just simply means when the page loads, so when it transitions from page 1 to 2, this page will load that effect on draw. And then when I go to page 3, let's just show it. So you'll notice when the green thing comes on, that's sort of the thing I'm wanting you to kind of keep your eye out for. Boom. So that's the on entry. And then on exit, it did the opposite. It faded out or it did something else. So let's go back and just have a really good look at that again. So animate both simply means it's going to do entry and exit animation to work it out. And it may even reverse the animation. I'm not 100% sure. They may even, because these are defaults that they create, these just simply might be settings that they change over time and we don't really notice that. But generally, the reason why this matters is because on the first frame, I wanted these guys to animate. So in typical cases, your headers, your footers, other items that are going to stay there for the whole thing, you want something to happen when it starts animating. So some of these things you'll see come on screen, but then they hold. So then when the transition happens from T-ball to under 12, you'll see all those other items don't move. And that's what we're talking about here. So the page animations are great. They solve a lot of problems. Your transitions do a lot of solving problems too, because it's nice and smooth. But you don't really want to see NBC come on, off, on, off. And that's what would actually be happening. So in some cases, I just take animation off completely. And how do you do that? Well, let's have a look at the stomp one. So this week was the only thing that comes on the homepage. You see right down the bottom, just hit remove animation and it will just get rid of it. You can also do select all, I believe. Hit animate. And if there's multiple items, it generally will let you do it. Otherwise, yeah, you just go ahead and hit remove animation and it's gone forever. There's heaps of reasons why you'd want to do that. This tutorial is pretty much done now, I'd say, in terms of how much we can take in for a session, but I'll post this up online. The starting point is really rich here, but I'd encourage anyone that's watching it that's interested in this stuff, try and just take your notes as you go, like pause the video and go, what was that? Go back and forth. And if I'm not making sense, which is a high likelihood I'm not, then please just come back to me, hit me up on any of the different channels that we've got, and we can have a look at those things, particularly for the people that were at practice tonight. Yeah, sorry, we couldn't work out a better time to suit everyone. But yeah, if this video at least gets you to the right question, that's a step forward. But yeah, I encourage you to download the free version, get yourself set up on an account, and yeah, just start designing, having some fun, doing stuff for yourself. And if you're interested, you'll be able to support the club by just simply being able to be shared a link where you can just tap on the link, load Canva, go in and change seniors to juniors or whatever the date is, and just little things like that where you can export and then load to social. You would not believe how much of a lifesaver that is, because it's not just that it doesn't take a lot of time, it's timeliness. that's one of our biggest enemies. So if we're needing to do social, and this problem's probably not going away, I would say, after all this time, it's going to potentially just shift into other channels, but the premise is still the same. The premise is we need to broadcast this message, and it needs to be professional enough that people will actually get attention taken enough to see it in this day and age, that it is an attention economy. So this is a way for us to stay front of mind, and stay professional, and reflect what we put out in the field as well, as a club and as a family. So I hope that's been really helpful for you, Dale, just tonight, just to kind of get some of those, again, methods of the madness of what you've probably already spent a lot of time on. I know yourself, you've spent a lot of time in there. And yeah, let's pick this up again, or reach out to me on any channel, and we can maybe target different tutorials that might be helpful to different people. Awesome.